Alright guys, welcome to the Florence Mall in Florence, Kentucky. Let's go inside, let's go check it out. And we'll see you inside. Hello everybody and welcome to Florence here in the state of Kentucky, and welcome to the Florence Mall. Boy, what a time I had here, even though I didn't get to spend as much time as I would have liked, because by the time we got here it was after 7 and the mall closed at 8. But the time I was here, I did have a really good experience. This was a really nice mall. It's definitely having struggles, and we'll get there in a later on in this voiceover, but it's still hanging in there, and I still think has the potential to make it, because it is one of really only 2 or 3 malls left in the Cincinnati area. And the fact that it's right over in the state line, and it tends to be a little bit cheaper over here than it does on the Ohio side, that also has it going. But in any event, now onto the history of this mall. This mall opened up in 1976. It was developed by the Hormart Development Company. The mall original anchors was Sears, Shillatos, Perot's, and J.C. Penney. So kind of interesting that J.C. Penney's been here since the beginning, and it is still here. Now, right now, the mall features over 100 stores, or at least spaces for stores, and an entire food court. The other and unique feature about this mall, which you don't see on the inside, but if you come in off the interstate, you can see it. It is this really and unique water tower, and it doesn't say the mall, it says Florence Y'all. And I think it's meant, just an opinion, that you're kind of getting closer to the south. As you know, this is south of Ohio, and it's heading toward Tennessee and then eventually down south. And I also think that it's a really unique feature, and I think that that it definitely stands out, and it gets you kind of to look at the mall, because you see this cool water tower and you're like, oh my goodness, and poof, and there's this pretty good sized shopping mall there. And the good news I can say too is that the city has confirmed that regardless what happens to this mall, which I hope it doesn't close, but for some reason it does, that particular water tower, it will stay there, and it will not be demolished. So that, I would say, is a pretty good thing. Now, they mentioned this mall opened up in 1976, and it was chosen for the location because it is right off of the Interstate 75 and Kentucky State Route 18. It is a 2-level mall, which what's interesting about this mall is that development company I mentioned, that was a real estate division of Sears. So you can kind of say Sears built this mall, and that's one thing that most people don't realize, is that these really big and department store companies, Sears, Penny's, Federated, and the May Company, they actually used to be full on, real estate, and there's many malls that they all helped build themselves. And that's why you see that a lot of times that the department stores own their own buildings even to this day, and that's the main reason why, because they were such an important influence. And so Sears built this mall, so even though Sears is sadly long gone and empty, you still get a piece of Sears because they still have this mall, and this mall is still there. So that's kind of interesting. Now, the general contractor was the Charles V. Menser Co. Sears was, I mentioned, it was one of the 4 anchor stores. It was the first thing to open up on March 10th, 1976. The mall itself didn't open up until 6 months after that, with Perot serving as a second anchor store to open up when the day the mall opened. And then just a year later, Shillatos and J.C. Penney were added. At the time of its opening, the mall had 87 stores. And I will say that when this mall opened, it did lead to this big and development that led to shopping plazas, started to be built around it. And it's kind of ironic because they came because of this mall, and now a lot of times in a lot of communities, those plazas are what are killing malls, which is really, really sad and depressing, but I will say. And this officially became the main retail hub for the northern part for the state here, as this is like only 5 miles from the Ohio line. It is right in the northern point, so this made for a very nice part for the northern part. Now, J.C. Penney, they mentioned, it has been here since the beginning. It is still here to this day, and it will probably be the last anchor to this mall. The other 3 anchor stores changed kind of as chains were acquired, merged, and or closed. So the Shillito's chain, it merged with the Reich Company, and all former Shillito's and your Reich stores briefly carried the dual brand of Shillito's Reichs from 1982 until 1986, when the chain merged into Lazarus. Pierogs was changed to LS Ayres in 1983, which in turn sold its store to the Hess Company, which, when I read that, I was confused at first because there was no Hesses here, but we will get there, how that all came to be, and it all kind of went around. Now, in the mid-'80s, even though this mall just opened up 10 years later, they did at that point do this renovation to the food court. I don't think it was a major change, but it's kind of interesting how 10 years into the mall's life and they're already changing it. Kind of interesting just how that works. Now, like I mentioned, the Hesses closed in 1993, and 1 year later, Lazarus moved his home goods into the former Hesses space. So at this point, you had two Lazarus stores that were the main and the home store, and of course, those would become Macy's during the May Federated merger. So that's how that this mall still has two Macy's stores, and to this day, they still have two Macy's stores, although the future for those looks kind of iffy, and we will get there in a few minutes. In 2003, the mall was officially acquired by the General Growth Properties, which was a partnership with the Teachers Retirement System for the state and of Illinois. So that's unique, and I don't know how they got involved with the mall. It doesn't really say a lot about this time in the history, so I don't know if they got the mall to help out teachers or if they had a tax write-off. Very, very interesting. And feel free, of course, if anybody knows, and comment down below. Like I always say, I'm getting better at comments, and I will respond to them as soon as possible. And both the Lazarus stores, they were officially converted to Macy's in 2005, just like I mentioned. The food court and was renovated again in 2004, which gives it the look that it's currently at today. So there's been two food court renovations to this mall, which why they spent that to do it twice for the food court I think is definitely interesting that they use their money that way. If it were up to me, they could have used it, another way. But the food court here does look very nice. I will say that. It was generally appealing to be in, and I wish that I could have ate there. But as I mentioned, we were here an hour before the mall closed, so that definitely limited our time to have any sort of food to eat there. We did eat later on in the nearby area. And then in 2018 was the first major hold of this mall, as Sears announced it'd be closing in the month of November. And to this day, it still sits empty, and it is separately owned, which definitely hurts, And that's the whole thing with this mall, too. They have 4 different owners to this mall. Brookfield Properties sold the mall in 2021 to the J&L Partners, and then it was sold to the Namdar Realty. And if you all know Namdar, they don't have a great history when it comes to, running shopping malls. They're very notorious for just kind of being stagnant, for just letting them sit there and just kind of be there. And that's what's definitely been happening here. There's been chains leaving, and there hasn't been too much things to replace it. There's been a few local things, but there hasn't been any major things, and that's kind of a trend I see with Namdar malls, where it's not like a sudden decline, but it's a slow, steady one, and that's what I think is starting to happen here. Hopefully I'm wrong and somehow it can turn around, because I hate seeing malls close, and this is generally a nice mall to where I don't want to see it close regardless. So hopefully I'm wrong, but we'll see. And then in 2024, Macy's put both their stores at this mall up for sale, as they do own both locations here. They are still for sale up to this date. I haven't seen anything that they were sold. But that is definitely worrying because, as I've mentioned in many other mall videos, Macy's doesn't put up buildings to sell just to sell. They sell them because they're unprofitable and they want to close them. So that's why I mentioned that Penny's will probably be the last anchor here. Because if I were to guess, Macy's will probably close next year. I thought it was going to close this year, but I think it's because they didn't find a tenant for the building yet. So they didn't really want it just to sit there and then paying, them paying to maintain the building. But I think once it's sold, if it's not this year, it'll be next year, it will end up closing. Because like I mentioned, they are not going to keep the store, open, for very long if they're up for sale. That's not the way Macy's operates. Maybe that's the way Sears operates, and apparently that's how JCPenney's going to do it, but that's not how Macy's does it. So once they leave, I think it's going to be a huge hit to this mall. It's going to be 3 out of 4 anchors that will be empty. And actually, speaking of JCPenney too, I will mention that this JCPenney was one of the 119 or so that was recently spun off by JCPenney. They no longer own this building, but everything I've been reading tells me that JCPenney plans on keeping these buildings open. So for now, I will say I have faith that they will stay, but only time will tell. I don't know for certain if they're gonna stay. We'll see. And I also don't know if that particular Claire's you just saw on the right stayed. As you know, all your Claire's started closing sales, and then about half of them were bought. Comment down below if anybody knows if this one stayed. But in any event, I'm going to stop talking here, because I don't think I want to be blabbing for the whole video, and do want to get just a little bit of some music in. But if you all do enjoy, you all know the drill. Make sure to hit like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you all later. Live from the Florence Mall, Alex Weinsheimer's out, and I will talk to you guys real soon. But for now, bye-bye.
everything